So you think about the resistance long term. The long-term resistance doesn't just happen theoretically. It happens regularly and throughout. Montgomery, Little Rock, Freedom, King awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, Malcolm assassinated, Voting Rights Act, Brown versus Board, bus boycott, all the different opportunities. All I'm trying to convey, a movement doesn't happen in one day. And you have to understand that there's deeper pieces that happen along the way. You know, when King was assassinated, Lyndon Johnson had gathered many leaders around. And one of the things that I read and always reflect on, it says, why would you be surprised that they're having riots and protests when you've been having your foot and your neck on their neck and their back for 300 years? So then people say, well, we got to keep mobilizing and keep being engaged in that manner and continue to make sure we have that progress. And I'm trying to convey the point to you, and hopefully this is what's resonating. You have to have multiple steps along the way to sustain it long term. That you have to be thinking it's not just about one day, and flip it the other way. For those that might be disappointed by the election results last year or excited about the election results that happened last year, that was just one day. That was not a lifetime. It was an election. It's not eternity. Right? So how do you shift and have a different perspective on how you think about things for the long term and being engaged in that respective way? So how will you sustain? You know, the book that has held me, God's Politics by Jim Wallace. Last line of the book, we are the ones we've been waiting for. Talked about throughout values the entire time. We could have different perspectives, but we have values that can align us, that can unite us and bring us all together in this way. If I want to figure out how I get to the long term, it's figuring out how we have those values and those perspectives in that way and in that respective manner. So I'm gonna tie this together by saying the following things, and again saying thank you for our Q&A. First, determine your end goals and then work backwards. Be very clear of where we're trying to go. How are we trying to make the adjustments along the way? If I'm thinking through a resistance and a long-term movement, then I got to ask myself, well, where are we trying to go? Because then if I do it that way, it allows me to build a more efficient manner. Let me break this down for you electorally. You know, if I have an election day on a Tuesday, I got to think about the weekend before. That's get out the vote weekend. Weekend before that is me preparing, and that's usually the trial runs itself. But I have to know how many voters do I need, how many doors are we going to be knocking on. Me knowing those numbers then determine how many people then are mobilizing in this way. In order for me to know that number at the end, then I work backwards, and I know I need to get X number every single day to get me there. You think about the movement itself. If you're trying to have 100,000, 500,000, a million that are showing up for activities, or to look at the Women's March, 6 million women and allies across the world engaged, that doesn't just happen without preparation. Right? And it was being very clear, what are our end goals? And their goal and their thought was not, I'm just going to have one activation. I'm going to be mobilizing in a continual way and mobilizing that way. Second, you heard me say this earlier, proper preparation prevents poor performance, as it always will and always does. Third, find your why. Fourth, SAR, situation, action, result. What is the situation? What's the action? What's the result we're trying to achieve from this? How do we have the clear determination of our shared values, our shared responsibilities, how they lead to shared benefits? You know, because if I understand that intersectionality. But then let me tie this together and make a personal anecdote as a way to close this out. For many people in this room, or many people that may be following us online, this might be your first time a part of a resistance. This may be your first time a part of a movement, if you will. Hopefully it won't be your last. When you think about the find your why, I'm going to give you two very brief anecdotes that hopefully bring it home. I told you that my daddy's favorite color was red, right? My dad for 28 years mopped hospital room floors, St. Barnabas Hospital, SCIU 1199 back home in the Bronx. My mama for 40 years worked in a manufacturing plant in New Jersey. That's what built it up. But it built it up because I remember that on Saturday afternoons, we would have to sell dinners to pay rent, to have enough money to pay rent. And when I finally got to the White House and I was sitting there and I had a portfolio, it was black and gold because I'm an alpha. I'm part of Alpha Phi Fraternity Incorporated because I had to be black and gold, right? A-Phi, right? My mom stood there quietly, and I said, tell me what's going through your mind. And she said, baby, we went from no house to the White House. Because my mom was homeless in Jamaica. She slept on church pews. Right? And so the trajectory was now, we went from no house in Jamaica to the Black House in Northwestern to the White House in D.C., now to the State House in Albany. Right? I didn't know what the long term was going to be. But because I thought about how just to be prepared, it allowed me to be ready for what came. To the men in the room, I say regularly, I say this often, I'm a man, I'm also a feminist. Right? You know, if someone goes after any community, you need to stand up and be clear about that. So if someone goes after women's rights, you go after me. You go after the Muslim rights, you go after me. You go after immigration rights, you go after me. You go after anyone else, you go after me. You got to think about it in that way. You got to be thinking about it to that next level. And how do I take it to the next level? Because I think about it in visuals. When I think about the Find Your Why, there's a photo that was hanging up in the White House when we were there every single day that the president said was going to hang up there throughout the entire 2 terms. There's a photo of a little young boy named Jacob Philadelphia. Now, Jacob's father, Carlton, was a national security staffer that was retiring. He was about to leave office, about to be engaged in that way. Came in, and during his final exit interview, he said, Mr. President, both of my kids have a question, but I don't know what the question is going to be. Which for any of you who are parents, you'd be terrified at that moment right there, right? Right? So his first kid, Isaac, says, Mr. President, why'd you eliminate the F-22 fighter jet program? It's kind of surprised you, but then you remember, okay, his daddy was a national security staffer. Okay, I can kind of gauge this, right? All right? All right? But then 5-year-old Jacob asked this question, and this is why I say find your why. This is how you sustain yourself for the long term. Jacob said, Mr. President, I just got a new suit. And Mr. President, I just got a haircut. And then he started to slowly stretch out his hand. He said, but Mr. President, I was wondering if I could touch your hair to know if it feels like mine. So he got quiet, he kind of pulled his hand back and said, say that again. He said, I was wondering if I could touch your hair to know if it feels like mine. And he pulled his hand back again, and the president said, touch it, dude, just touch it, all right? And then he touched it, and he said, what do you think? He said, yeah, it feels like mine. How do you sustain the resistance long term? Find your Jacob, find your why. Find your Jacob, find your why. Find your Jacob, find your why.